Thank you. I'll be using a USB and a display here, but first I'd like to do, and I'll try to keep it very quick and brief, and I think everyone will agree that that's the time is of the essence. And I'd like to begin with a little housekeeping. First of all, Robert's summary of what this is about, it was a peerless summary. I don't think in all my years I've heard such an extraordinarily broad and yet penetrative explanation of why a forum like this should exist and indeed should persist. So not only was I happy to come to ANU because things are a little quiet at UWA where I do a lot of lecturing, but there's an atmosphere here that I've missed, quite frankly. And I'm so pleased to see so many old friends and listen to wonderful talks. Now the housekeeping. David Reeve, there was a date that you missed out on, and it's May 23, 1945. That is, you missed only mentioning it as a most important date in 1965. I'll cover that in my speech there. The equation that my very old friend Aristides mentioned was always there and was very simple for everybody to realise, and that was a fulcrum with Sukarno in the middle. It was the TNI, let's say, on one side, and the PKI and its affiliates on the other. So I was pleased that he dealt with that very, very quickly. I did not agree that Nasution was the man who was going to stop Sukarno or stop the communists. Nasution was the great Western hope for a long time, but I think if you follow what I have to say later, that you'll see that Yanni, in fact, may have indeed signed his own death warrant somewhere midway through the year because of his actions, which again I'll deal with. I want to also say, as far as I was concerned, the PKI was delusional, utterly delusional. And I thought that for a long, long time. I was nearly failed by J.A.C. Mackie for writing an essay saying that the PKI would never stand up, and I wrote that in 1962. Of course, I was very young and I probably put it in rather awkward phrasing, but I then began doing translations for the people who didn't speak Indonesian, the foreign press and diplomats, whose English was the common language. And I did a lot of work for AIDIT, the National Party, and the President. And that was the most exciting part. No matter what you thought about Sukarno, he was one of the most exciting speakers and the most exciting personalities to be around. And you had to turn your rational mind on to say, this is a dreadful place, it's 1,000% inflation, why am I happy? You know, you couldn't go for a walk at night without risking breaking your legs, falling down manholes because people would steal them and sell the steel. The place was an absolute chaos, and the PNI and the PNI was split, and so on. All of these things I'll deal with. Once again, the word amok, treat that, I think, not in this context. Amok is a short fuse stuff, and it's terrible to see. But usually, when amok is spent, the person himself or herself is spent. It's usually a him. And quite often, a wife will end up just having the man who was, if he hasn't been killed, doing gardening and menial tasks after that. It's a breakdown. Nick, I dealt with the PKI. Once again, thank you, Jeffrey, for bringing that up. The Axis, because that was an important part of the PKI propaganda midway through the year. Things are going so well, we're the southern pole to this axis. And it probably didn't mean all that much to people outside at the time, but within the PKI it was used quite a lot. Conspiracies I won't deal with. And the right question, well, that's what we're here really to ask, aren't we, Aristides? He always asks the right question. And show me how to work this. And you'll notice that I'll just read a line or so and move on. What I wish to do with you today is to take you with me and see through my eyes, my correspondent's eyes, how 1965 unfolded. I went back in 1964, late 1964, and my first and I went straight to the palace, listened to President Sukarno speak, went down to the PTT and wrote a story that said that Indonesia will leave the United Nations in the new year. Then I thought, I'll be expelled after about 4 days of my arrival, because if this doesn't work. Anyway, the President didn't say anything, the Foreign Office didn't say anything, and 3 to 4 days later they went out of the United Nations, so I was safe. So it was that was December. Now I get into 1965.
To move slides, just press the right hand.
Press the right-hand side, all right. So the year of the inevitable. It wasn't perhaps inevitable in December, but you'll see why it was. A little bit of earlier history than Madiun. The Communists played, I specialise in early Indonesian history, the first days of the Republic, and the Communists played no role in the Battle of Surabaya, in which Muslims, Christians, Buddhists from all parts of the archipelago fought together to prevent a Dutch return. And I'll move on just to say, and Madiun, already covered by Geoffrey, was very, very important, and it proved to be the Achilles heel in their propaganda for, well, it was never removed. It was always on the agenda when the army officers wished to either poke fun or criticise the PNI. Once again, Geoffrey's handled this very, very well. It's hard to exaggerate the dangers for Europeans. Racial hatreds added to political unrest. The PKI trucked bands of toughs to spontaneous Jakarta demonstrations, and its affiliates choreographed loud Senayan Stadium extravaganzas. Gruesome signboards, foreigners being banned, and on 25 May, Sukarno lavishly praised the PKI on its contrived 45th anniversary, because it wasn't really 45 years old. It had a stop-start existence, before 125,000 people. You will see the pictures will tell the story. The party trucked in demonstrators. All these photographs are mine, they're black and white. I'm sorry for the quality. I had to take them off contact, but I still have all the negatives from this period, about 3,000 or 4,000 of them. Prelude to the showdown. Well, once again, Geoffrey has handled this very well. I'm just saying that my two key mentors were William McMahon Ball and Dr. Peter Russo, and they individually were in Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan just before the outbreak of World War II, and yet the safety for diplomats conventions were upheld. Not so in Indonesia. Mobs burned and ransacked the British and Indian embassies and the USIS, publicly burning books. A steel fence for the new Australian embassy had foundations 10 feet deep to stop the mobs. When translating for PKI leader Dianated, his minders, remember they're behind me and I'm behind Dianated with my head a bit lower, of course, would give me the cutthroat signs and bully me and butt whenever they could. And one of them campaigned for my expulsion. This was an Antara bulletin. I'll just read the last line. In view of this behaviour, it would be appropriate for Palmos to immediately leave Indonesia. By the way, he comes into it later on. That's Mr. Adi Karim, who was chairman of the Journalists Association of Indonesia, which had just been captivated by Sukarno and the PKI. So anything from that point on, that was May 25, I think, early May, 15. So anything from that point on in Antara was part of the overall propaganda program. As Dean of the Press Corps and honorary interpreter to diplomats, which I've referred to, I was somewhat protected. But the European journalists from the socialist states, who of course look European, as I do, they suddenly found that they were unacceptable. They were neckerlims, and that the communist toughs took no notice of the fact that they could wear red armbands or show their hammer and sickle badges. Not at all. They weren't Asian, so they used to rob them and beat them. And it's only a funny laugh. It's a laughing matter now, but they used to sort of act in a rather disdainful manner to us when they were in favour. But of course, when the atmosphere changed from USSR to China, they were on the outer, and they used to then come and seek refuge in the press club, which of course had cold beer and friendly faces and very funny stories from people like Tim. There's a Chinese billboard with minor changes, adapted to PKI needs, advocating the violence, very common. The year of living dangerously, I've dealt with this. This was the report on Sukarno wishing to take Indonesia out of the United Nations, which he did, and the reason it was so it had such an impact was, of course, it had echoes of Germany's 1933 departure from the League of Nations in preparations for war. Straight after that, immediately after, meaning a couple of weeks, out came the anti-UN billboards then. And there we are, of course, there's always an Uncle Sam in this, and the Belenggu, it's the handcuffs are being broken off. The United Nations has handcuffed Indonesia. Well, now we're broken out of those handcuffs. 1965 saw billboards and slogans flourish and daily demands to support the President's call for a NASACOM power-sharing cabinet. I want you to try to think that in your newspapers, even in English newspapers, I didn't read, I got all of my information from Indonesian newspapers. I used to go the night before as they were being published and put my reports in by about 3 to 4 o'clock in the morning when the PTT was empty anyway. Didn't have to line up. And here are the slogans that I had to hafalkan, memorise. Avid, Nefos, Aldefos, Bunting Steer, Berdikari, Retilling, Tricora, Gonepo, Reshuffle, Manipal, Hostek, and NASACOM, and probably a lot of others. And often news items would contain 4 or 5 of those, including Yang di Pertuan Agung, the president, commander, he had about 11 titles. And the truly sycophantic journalists would begin their story. The great leader of the revolution and commander-in-chief of the armed forces and prime minister and chief scout at some stage, and so on. No. And if it happened to be Women's Day and it was honorary patron of Women's Day, and you'd finally get the third line found that he then delivered a speech. Well, it was a nervous time. You've heard Geoffrey Miller's assessment, and he had a bit of protection there, you would think. But out in the streets, it was Ganyang Malaysia billboard. This was, you could see, there's hardly an adult there. This is near a children's school. NASACOM is the way that the PKI is going to get into power through a power-sharing arrangement. And here's poor old Abdul Rahman skewered on bamboo lances. Now, that is not abiding by diplomatic convention. That stayed for months, you know, until the coup. Here's the little digger in the middle. He's wearing a scarf which is flowing. I apologise once again for the qualities. I do have it in focus, but not here. There's the Tunku. There'll be an Uncle Sam in the background and a John Bull. But here we are with our little boxing gloves on, trying to help Malaysia, which of course is doomed and running scared. Now the Fifth Force troops, which have been mentioned before, I'll go into that a little later. They'd use hammers, hoes and rifles to smash Malaysia, but there was never any doubt that the Fifth Force was going to be the Communist Party's People's Force, which would destroy the enemies in green. The Malaysian volunteers, the PKI, tried to thwart the army leaders using a fifth armed force comprising workers, farmers and volunteers, who the PKI alleged would be used to fight the new enemy, Malaysia. PKI units showed what they would do to enemies of the people, like the army, at the PKI's May 25 show at Senayan Stadium. There they are.
5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Yes, and they're thousands. In their hundreds there, 125,000. Note Marx and Engels in the background. I have 20 or 30 of these displays. Just one or two is enough. They came out with swords, parangs, and bamboo spears. And these displays went on for 10 to 15 minutes to show that this force, they were trained, by the way, in West Java, that this force would be the one that would destroy all enemies against the revolution. And almost daily, the Harian Rakyat pushed the Nasacom drive for Nasacom, and on the bottom, on the left there, you see kick out the American Peace Corps. Here we have early Soviet-style posters, Russian hammers and bodies, but with Indonesian pitchy cups added. A bit obvious, but whenever in doubt, they chucked in another one of these, smash whatever it was. I don't think it was smash Malaysia on that one. I think it was just smash the imperialists. And here is the Long March and the important event that I'm talking about. That I brought up as one of the key dates that must always be taken into consideration from now on, and that is the decision for the PKI to stage a long march, a copycat long march. And I followed this unnewsworthy event from its disastrous Surabaya start through to Central and West Java. Now, the turnout was very poor, and I concluded that while the farmers might vote for the PKI, they would never fight for them. Supporters were thin on the ground. This was a welcome committee in quite a large town. Almost nobody. A dozen or so survived the march, and at Bekasi, which is just southeast of Jakarta, SOBSI members filled the ranks and they walked the last 5 kilometres to make it look as if hundreds and hundreds of people had come all the way through Java, and they gathered this sort of, the Rolling Stone had gathered huge numbers of supporters. Well, it was a failure, and it brought on a feeling of impending disaster as far as I was concerned. And I had already said that I didn't believe that the party could win, but now I saw it as truly weak outside of Jakarta. And so army leaders would obviously see that before me or with me, that the PKI must now use what was commonly called in those days as a stiletto heel strategy. That is, a woman of only, in kilograms these days, 50 kilograms wearing a stiletto heel can do $25,000 damage to a beautiful new parquetry floor. simply because the stiletto heel impresses and imprints the weight, multiplies the weight of that impression, the force, I mean, 50 times. Now, so I figured that that's probably what they must do now, focusing the pressure on Jakarta. And for that, they needed constant support of the most popular man in Java, and of course, they courted him, and they courted him in a most slavish manner. There he is. I mean, you couldn't count the number of photographs of Sukarno that was on these banners. Here he is arriving for this particular day, 23 May 1965. That is aided on his right, on our left. We've already dealt with August 4, Sukarno falling ill. Yes, it was true. I didn't dare write what I felt at the time because I thought I'd be I had no verification, and so I held off writing much about it, but of course the rumours were around, and it was true that he had fallen ill. But a few days later, he invited the press, in local and foreign press, and he walked us around the lawns to show us that he was up and recovered. But of course, the fact that he did that more or less proved that he had fallen ill. Reach for the Stars was the 17th of August speech. Now, he was a tired-looking president by this time, and what I had to do, I've only got a minute or two now, I had to stand behind the president, and of course my head was always, at least a metre lower for protocol and to be almost out of sight with a pair of headphones on and speaking. And it was honorary work. But this year, it wasn't as exciting as the previous years. And he used so many acronyms that I couldn't quickly translate them in full to my audience. And essentially the main points were that he would now begin confiscating United States investments. Malaysia is scared and doomed. The foreign press is warned not to criticise me as the great leader of the revolution or lie about the state of the economy. And he was the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and I may create a fifth armed force. That was important. That was on the list. So from 21 to 27 August, there was a news hiatus, and there was an electric mood in town. And here are the rumours that got pace and credibility. Sukarno had tried to split the anti-PKI by appointing a junior general into cabinet. True. General Yani had objected and overruled the president. True. Yani and his colleagues told Sukarno they had lost confidence in his cabinet. True. China had smuggled weapons into Java from Macau for the PKI. Maybe later true. And China declared the Soviet Union was now a neo-colonial Nekolim nation. So, and then Sukarno definitely fell out with the USSR over loan defaults, and particularly the funding of the Senayan Stadium, which Sukarno insisted that everybody must come free, and the Russians had said, well, to help pay for it, we want you to charge a small ticket, and there was and at Chittagong Ironworks, or steelworks that the Russians had financed, and it was still not up and running. So the president, after that time, you were just waiting for something to break. It would be almost like a psychological relief to come. The president created Kotari, Berdikari High Command, an acronym with an acronym, to save face after the promotion fiasco that I've mentioned here. And Kotari's agenda, this is how unrealistic it was to solve 1,000% inflation within a year and abolish injustice and corruption. And of course, within probably a week or two, Kotari had vanished from the scene.
1 minute, Frank.
1 minute. I've got a minute to go. I wrote a weekender, what's called a weekender story in journalism. It's more or less a summary of how the week went. And by curious quirk publishing, the West Australian alone published the one that I predicted there would be a coup, because I cited a dangerous atmosphere, which after all that had happened was a pretty thin reasoning. But it did, of course, happen. But on Jakarta on 27 September, that cable had come back, or that news had come back to the PWI, to Antara, and my old foe, the one who wanted me out a couple of months earlier, he scorned my coup prediction without naming me, and he's saying a coup d'etat by certain forces will fail. So that gives you an idea that anyone who got into Antara must be almost acceding or admitting that the rumours of PKI were so strong that he could talk about it. And of course he said that the coup d'etat will fail because people will rise again, as they did in Kashmir, where in 1951 army officers had attempted a coup. This nearly runs me up out of time. I was there on the morning of October 1. I found myself outside of General Suharto's house in the dark. My camera was taken from me because I imprudently asked a couple of the tall soldiers there with yellow scarves what unit were there. I didn't recognise them. Of course, they recognised me as a Nekolim immediately and ripped the film out. And I then did the most amazing sycophantic imitation of President Sukarno, and I could imitate him very well, saying that the new dawn is on us. Indonesia is such a great country that killing a foreigner will not be seen as, it's not the sort of thing that a great country does. And they kicked my pants and moved me on. And after that little embarrassing thing, I went around the corner to Rosian Anwar's house. I was a famous journalist at the time. And I waited until they were gone, and then I went straight away to General Yanni's house, where I saw for the first time in my life, first time in my Indonesian life, blood-spattered wall. And so I was probably 2 hours late in getting there. Then I went back to Hotel Indonesia. But I want to end this now with one little secret for you all, which is now going to be Rahasia Umum. And if you don't know Indonesian, that's something you must remember. Rahasia means secret. Umum means general secret. It means so-and-so is having an affair with so-and-so. No one's allowed to talk about it, but everybody knows about it. And I'll tell you, the Rahasia Umum was that it was either the army or the PKI that would strike. So I got a call in Hotel Indonesia. The reason it was in the Hotel Indonesia was that the PTT had already been closed up. And this chap lived in Jalan Gresik. See, number 1 is Hotel Indonesia. Where Jalan is written, he lived about there. And he said, it started. So I went up to where he was. I'll go back. I went up to where he was, number 2. This is where I got my pants kicked. Number 3 is Rosihan Anwar's house that I slunk away then and went to his. By the way, they didn't steal my camera while I waited. Number 4 was a family friends of mine lived there. So I was able to sit in there for a while until dawn. And then number 5, I went over to Yanni's house. So that's okay. No, there's somewhere I've missed it. That's Rosihan Anwar today. This is the end of my. The public secret is this. I spoke to this man after the coup, and I said, thanks for the tip. It was really good. I said, how did you know the PTT was down and you had to come into the Hotel Indonesia and ring 221, which is mine? And he said, I know nothing about that call. And he's quite a famous man, still alive today. He's never admitted he called me. And I know why, because he was a pro-army man and he expected that the army had struck and it was the other people who hadn't struck. Thank you very much for your tolerance.